Picking the right running lead system is tricky. It's certainly a lot harder than just grabbing a pack of lead clips. Yes, there are plenty of systems available in the tackle shop, and I've tried most of them. They've all got a few issues, and that's frustrating. I mean, wouldn't it be great if there was just a system that you could buy, that you could take anywhere, that's just as easy to use as a lead clip? I've never been able to put together a system that ticks all of those boxes. That is, until now. So I'm going to grab a pack of tungsten rig tubing. One of the key elements of a running rig is the actual run ring itself. This is a plastic run ring made by Fox. Various manufacturers make these plastic run rings, but I quite like the Fox ones because this bit here will break at about 10 pounds of force, which is perfect for kind of general carp fishing use. Then we're going to need a quick link. Any design will do, just something you can quickly and easily clip a lead on and off. Then we need a length of 3mm silicone tube. I'm just going to cut that in two for the minute. To put these components together, take the run ring and hook the clip onto it like that. Then take the silicone sleeve and push that over the clip. And you want to push it all the way up. And I find if you just put a boilie needle through there, you can then expose the leg there, because that's the leg that you need to hook the lead onto. Take the run ring assembly, thread the main line through and pass it up the rig tubing. Then I'm going to take a helicopter sleeve. Now obviously a helicopter sleeve was designed for helicopter rigs and not running rigs. We're going to use it to make a running rig, so just bear with me on this one. There are two components in the heli sleeve system. You've got this little bead here, and then we've got the main sleeve. Now, I'm not going to use this for the minute, but there is an option that you can use that for that might help you in certain situations, but I'm just going to put that to one side for the minute. Take the heli sleeve and thread it onto the main line like that, and then we get the rig tubing and we'll be able to push the rig tubing onto the sleeve. The one thing I do find about these components is that the Nash Heli sleeve and the Nash Klingon tubing, they work very well together and you get a really secure fit between these two components. So quite a lot of force there, and this means that the likelihood of this rig tubing becoming disconnected from this sleeve is very low, and I like that about this. If you use different rig tubing with this sleeve, you might get a completely different result. You might not even be able to fit the tubing onto this sleeve, but these work really nice and get a perfect fit. The next bit we need is a quick change swivel, so any size 8 quick change swivel will do. To connect it to the main line, I'm going to tie a Palomar knot. So I pass through the eye and then back through the eye. I tie an overhand knot with a loop, pass the swivel through the loop, flip the loop up above like that, and just draw it gently down and just make sure that all of those loops go down neatly together. One of the good things about the Palomar knot is that you don't have to pull it down tightly to cinch it closed. You can just kind of pull it down and it's pretty much good to go. Nip the tag end, and all I'm going to do, I'm going to pull the main line from above the tubing and pull the swivel into the sleeve like that, and then the run ring just sits onto the shoulder of the sleeve like that. For the lead, I could just take this 3-ounce pair and hook that swivel on, but actually to make the whole rig kind of more neat and compact, I like to cut that off, so I've just got the brass loop there in the lead. Now this bit can be a bit fiddly. You need to flick the tube in down there so you can see the leg, and then you take the lead and there you go, just pop that on there, run it round, and then you take the sleeve and just pop the leg out and put it back over like that. A little bit fiddly, but the result is very neat and streamlined, and it gives you interchangeability of leads. So with the lead system built and the rig tied, we can mount a bait and get fishing. To attach the rig, just take the loop, hook it on the quick change swivel, then take the anti-tangle sleeve and just slide it over the leg of the quick change clip. Then take the main line and gently pull it, and the swivel and the sleeve will disappear up into the heli sleeve, and the result will be this 4 centimetre long assembly of anti-tangle sleeve and heli sleeve. So that's the finished system. You can see I'm holding that by the rig tubing, and there's no way that that rig tubing is disconnecting from the sleeve, so it's a really secure link there. You've got a lot of stiffness in this assembly here, so you get this cantilever action. This assembly is booming the rig away from the lead, and this is what helps keep it straight and tangle free in flight. So the lead system itself is just a pure free running lead system. There's no shock effect, there's no bump effect, but it will fool the carp into thinking that he's gotten away with it every single time. Fantastic bite indication, screaming takes. You can take this rig absolutely anywhere and catch some really tricky fish. Right, let's go and have a look at carp number 1. There we go, we'll have him out and get a little picture. Une petite pour la rivière. Ah oui, ah oui. Elle était combative.
On va applaudir parce que...
Merci, merci. You can see the size of the plastic ring relative to the thin piece of the helicopter sleeve there, and you've got loads of space. You know, even if you get a bit of debris, bit of weed, some leaves in there, then there is no way that that is going to jam up, so it absolutely flies through. I've fished with this setup for 2 years and never had a jam up, not once. This is why it's so important for this rig to have a nice big free running ring on it. There is plenty of shot here, and you don't want anything that can jam up, so a nice big plastic ring, very safe, and any bits of shod and stuff that's just going to fly over the top. If you remember that bead that I showed you, so this is the bead that comes with the helicopter sleeve. This bead has got a very large diameter bore in it. In actual fact, it's a tapered bore because the hole on that side is bigger than the hole on that side, and the whole thing is tapered. Now this is big enough so that it does fly up and down this rig tubing here. Now I wouldn't ever do this if I was fishing in weed or anything like that, but on a relatively clean bottom, if you were to add this bead into the setup, what you can do is you slide it down the rig tubing there, and you can see that the taper, it'll just nip onto the top of the heli sleeve there with just a little bit of force, and that will temporarily hold the lead up by the sleeve. So if you want to set this up properly, what you ought to do, wet that sleeve, just nip the bead on like that, and just set it so that the lead just holds, and then with one shake of the head of the carp, bunk, it's off, and we're into a running setup. This is a way of creating a little shock and run, a little bump and run running lead system. So why would you want to add that bead? I'm not doing it to hook the carp better. In actual fact, most of the time I don't have the bead, I just use it as a pure free running lead system. But if you want to use this rig with large diameter sticks and cast them out a long way, what you might find is that in flight the drag of the PVA stick is going to cause separation of the run ring from the helicopter sleeve, and you'll see the two kind of separate in flight. If that's happening, you can use this little bead trick to pin the lead temporarily next to the helicopter sleeve. It just keeps the two nested together neatly in flight, and then as soon as the carp hits that lead, bunk, it's off, and it's into a running lead system anyway. So how I would set it up is set it up as a free running system as I use it, but if you're having problems with the two separating in flight just because of how your casting style, the distance you're fishing, or the size of the PVA sticks that you're using, then adding this bead is an option. But I would never add this bead if there was any weed or anything that I thought could jam it up, because we're reducing the size of the clearance between that bead and the rig tubing. If you're using a lead-free leader or a mono leader, you've got much more space, so you've got even more safety. So that's the completed system. We've got this nice stiff section here which cants the rig away from the lead. This is really important for keeping it all straight in flight. I've found that by continuing the stiffness all the way along right down to the hook, there's just no way that this can mess up. Even if that fraps up round there, it shakes out. I've never wound this rig in tangled. It just won't tangle. So this is the normal way I have this set up. 3-ounce pair, link clip, bit of silicone, and then this bead. Now I'm using 20-pound bullet here, and if this leg gets trapped, I know that ring will break with about 10 pound of force. So if I'm fishing over rocks, leg gets trapped, I pull for a break, and it's that ring that is going to break. I get the lead back, 99% of the time, but I've got a breakaway system there built into this. But it's still strong enough to cast a 3-ounce lead, 90 meters, no problem at all. Later in the video, I'll show you how far you can cast a running rig with a 9-foot rod. So by having it set up like this, I can travel to the lake or the river without the leads on. I can just clip the leads on literally when I get to the water. I can change lead sizes if I have to, not an issue. It's very, very safe. If I get a lead trapped, I can break it away with some really strong mainline. That's not an issue. But it's also strong enough that I can cast it a really long way as well. So it's a good kind of go anywhere, take anywhere setup. This is going to work over a hard bottom, firm clay, firm silt, soft silt. It really doesn't matter. If you're fishing over weed, then you need to make a small modification. I'm going to show you how to do that. So if you want to set this up really safely for weed, you can use the same ring, and we're just going to use a small bit. I'm just going to eyeball that there, and I'm going to cut off. That's about 5 mil, so just the kind of length of the ring there. So I can pass that literally over there like that, and hopefully just, there we go, just opened up that hole there. Then I'm going to take some lightweight mono. You can use just about anything for this. I'll just get 15 centimeters of this, and then hook the tag end of that into the baiting needle and snick that through there like that. Pull that until the tag ends are parallel. Take a lead, pass one of the tag ends through, take both tag ends and tie an overhand knot with those. So we've got a very simple loop here, and then take both of those tag ends, pull them, and that knot goes down to be very small and is going to disappear underneath that silicone. If you are fishing a very weedy swim at close range, then I'd probably just snick that off there like that, and then that knot is going to pull apart with very little force indeed. If you need to cast a bit further out, then do another overhand knot and tie that like that. The further out you need to fish and the bigger the leads you want to use, the more of these knots you'd have to add. This material won't break as such, it's that when it comes under load, those little simple granny knots are literally going to undo. This gives me a controllable option for any situation I might be faced with. So I've got 3 stacked granny knots there, and I just go down to the top, snip those off, take the silicone and just wheedle it over the knot so that disappears. So what we've made is a running lead system with a rotten bottom connection that's hidden away. Now you see the way I've done this there, I've lost the swivel effect there, there's no swivel. Now I'm really not bothered about that. I'd be very happy to fish it like that. So with this setup, it's those granny knots that are going to pull apart and dump the lead if necessary. Certainly not every time. So if you're in a fishing situation where you find you're regularly getting a lead trap because it's very rocky, then you might want to move over to a system like this. Otherwise, if you do it with the quick link setup, you're going to be breaking rings and going through a lot of rings. So it's always better to break the mono rather than the ring. So it's an option for really rocky swims or a lot of weed, but you know, you can tune it to be whatever you need to be. You just need to be aware of how far you're fishing, what size of lead you're using, and what you're fishing over. So you can use this exact same setup with a lead-free leader like Klingon or a mono snag leader. And those are the two options that I use for most of my fishing. So maybe you're wondering why on earth I've paired a Fox run ring with a Nash Heli sleeve when there are so many ready-made available running rig systems out there. Well, it's simple. I've tested just about every running lead system ever created, and they kind of work in certain situations, but they don't work everywhere. They all have limitations. This is the only combination that I can take absolutely anywhere and know it's going to work and be safe. Having just one setup that I can take anywhere is a massive advantage. It's one less thing to worry about. So one of the reasons why I love this setup, and I find it so universal, so flexible, I can have my rods ready to go. When I get to the venue, I can clip on whatever lead I need. Small leads, big leads, gripper leads, aerodynamic distance leads. It doesn't matter, I can just make the decision on the day. I have my rigs all ready to go on a board. I always make them up to about 6 inches long. I clip them on and screw on a bait and wang them out.
Ah, elle est magnifique. Oh là là.
Here we go. What a stunning creature. Led me a merry dance, this one. Fantastic. Right, come on mate, you've beaten me up enough. You can go now.
Elle est belle, hein?
Voilà. This system really does make my fishing quick, simple, efficient, and most importantly, flexible. Once I've got a dozen rigs tied, all I need is some PVA sticks and that's it. I'm going fishing. So I thought we'd head up the local boating lake, cast a few running rigs and show you some of the problems that you might encounter. There's fixes to all of them, but it's important to understand the do's and don'ts. I've got a few different rods with me. I've got a little 9 foot 3 pound dwarf, 9 foot 3 pound scope, and then a 9 foot 3.5 pound scope special. We've got a few different setups, all based around the running rig that I've been using, and we've got some PVA sticks, and we're going to have a little play. So one of the things I've never actually done is I've never actually measured how far out I can cast these running rigs. I'm just guessing at the end of the day, to be honest, because when I'm fishing kind of max range, I'm really not bothered about how many wraps I'm fishing. I'm just getting out there as best as I can. So I have no idea how far I can cast my little 9 foot dwarfs. I don't know what the scopes will do either. So I know that the scopes are going to be able to cast further. And in theory, the 3.5 pound scope will cast the furthest because I can put a bigger lead on it. But yeah, a few things to work on. See how we go. To be honest, I don't normally bother using distance sticks on my public fishing. There's just no need for it. I'm not fishing to a tight on a spot. I'm just getting them out there in the zone. But I want to see how far these rods are casting, so we'll set up a couple of sticks and we'll see where we're at. Right, I'm going to set up the little dwarf to start with. So I've paired this one with a little LR 6000, typical size of reel for these rods really. I know people can't wrap their head around, you know, low cost rods like this being able to catch 50-pound carp, but I've had multiple 50s on these. They're fantastic little rods. But you might say, well, why do you need a scope then? Well, what you're going to see is that this is not going to be able to cast anywhere near as far as a scope will. Main line on this rod is 12-pound Nash bullet. Typical kind of 0.33, 0.35 diameter main line. I'm going to clip a 2.5 ounce lead on because that's going to pair nicely with this 3-pound dwarf. Could do a 3 ounce lead, but you can't do a 3, 3.5 or a 4. Well, you could, but you're not going to be able to cast them very far because they just don't have the backbone that the scopes do. And one of the reasons why I love this system is that I can just grab a lead, get me a quick link, hook it on, pull the sleeve over, and he's ready to fly. I've set this one up with rig tubing, so let's just have a wang with that and see what it'll do bare lead with tubing before we put a rig on. I thought we were in a spot of bother then. The sailors arrive. That was terrible. We got a bit of a frap up there. Don't know what happened. Didn't sound right coming off the rod. Right, there we go, that's out there. And I'm going to wind down, tighten to the lead, put it in the clip and see what we got. If you fish into a clip, if you've got a side wind or something, you'll cast into that clip, or you're measuring the cast distance, you're kidding yourself really of how far you're fishing. You have to wind down to the lead. If you're not winding down tight to the lead, then you're not actually fishing anywhere near out as far as you think you are, especially with any wind. In perfect conditions, sure, it's going to be very similar, but you've got to wind down to the lead to get an accurate number. So let's see how we did. 5, 6, 7, 21, just over 21.5. Bare lead, 2.5 ounce, 9-foot dwarf. So one of the things you have to pay attention to with running rigs is getting a balance in your setup. So I've got a little 2.5 ounce running lead here, and that's not the sort of thing that you want to partner with big baits and big PVA sticks. You want to use little baits, maybe little sticks, because the bigger the bait and the bigger the stick on the end, that is going to make bait separation worse. It's going to exacerbate the problem. So for this little setup, I'm going to use a 15mm bait, little size 8 shod twister, bit of 15-pound zig flow, any mono would do, 0.35. I could have used a bit of the bullet, but I tend to carry these little spools of mono with me just because they take up very little space. They're certainly a lot more convenient to carry around than a spare bulk spool. Little 2.5 ounce lead. We're going to be distance limited anyway, so I know 0.35 mono is going to be able to be cast the sort of distance that the 2.5 ounce lead can manage anyway, so the whole thing's working in harmony. So I've just knocked up a really basic mono hair rig. That's a nice balanced setup, and with a 2.5 ounce lead, that 15mm bait is not going to have anywhere near enough drag to cause separation in flight. If you've ever tried running rigs and you're having the problems with them separating in flight, then just fish a smaller bait relative to the size of the lead that you're using. So let's give that a wang and see how far we can get that. I know it's silty out there, and I know lots of anglers are absolutely paranoid about casting into silt, and I just let that lead fly. I didn't feather it down, I didn't stop it in flight like I normally would, and a 2.5 ounce lead, was that plugged? No, it wasn't plugged, not an issue. 19 and a half. So we've lost a wrap. using a single 15mm bait. So if you want to maximise distance, then fish a smaller bait. So the other thing to note, I watched that on the way out and there was absolutely no issues with bait separation whatsoever. There was no feathering. I just fired it out there as best as I could, launched it in the water, and did it tangle on impact? No. Did it separate in flight? No. Even with thin mono, if you only need to fish 19, 20 wraps, little 9-foot dwarf, 3 pound, 2.5 ounce lead, easy. And I'm not the best caster in the world, I'm really not. I've got mates that can hit 160, 170, and watching them do it is just something else. You can almost have a cup of tea while the lead's in flight. It's bonkers, but I am not there. Right, PVA stick mixes do not have to be complicated or expensive. All this is some boilie crumb with some Himalayan salt. You could put regular salt in. You can not bother with the salt, but I always like a little bit of salt because salt is highly attractive. I've just put boilies through a blender to make that. You could have done it with flake, but flake's great in a bait boat or for a rowing boat, but for a PVA crumb stick, I want a nice fine crumb, and the only way I can get that is to blend it. I could just compress this into a dry mix, but I like to put a dollop of a syrup in it. You don't need huge quantities of this stuff. I'm just looking to get a little bit of liquid attractor in there that matches the mix. I just want to make it damp so that it holds it together really. If it's too wet, when I compress the sticks, it's going to ooze out and be a sticky mess. If I want to get even more liquid attractor into the stick, then I can dip the stick before I cast out, and I do that a lot. The other reason why I like this mix is that it lasts. Keep them dry, keep them out of the light, and you can leave the sticks for weeks. You can see the grains of Himalayan exposed now. I've made the mix a bit drier. Now for maximum distance, you need a small stick. The shorter the stick, the further you're going to be able to cast it. And there's little indicators on here, and those indicators tell me how long the stick's going to be. So if I put that on there, when the top of that gets to there, I'm going to make basically a square stick, and it's just starting to compress it a bit more. Right, I can put a little bit more in because I want a really tight stick. I can either press it on my hand, I normally just press it onto the board. A little bit more. There we go. One compressed small PVA stick, loads of attraction, but minimum size. Also, what you don't want to do, you don't want to leave the fluff on. If I cut that there, then that's a fluffy tag. I want to cut that there because that's less drag. Could be a little bit tighter that, but let's wang it out and see how it goes. So there's lots of different ways you can hook on a PVA stick. One thing I like to do is if you hook it through once and then start twisting and then hook it through again, you actually get to make the PVA stick even tighter, and a tighter stick casts further. So when distance matters, you can just use that extra trick to make it extra firmer. Nice. Again, I was watching that go out and it went out absolutely perfectly. No separation. I get a few questions on social media with people struggling with PVA melting. Well, I've wound that out and I've wound it in. It hasn't been on the lake bottom for more than 5 seconds, 10 seconds. There is no PVA residue. I fish with the Nash fast melt, winter or summer, and I never have an issue. 18, just shy of 19. So that little PVA stick has only cost us half a wrap. If that's all you need, then great. Adding a little PVA stick like that at that sort of range isn't going to make a massive amount of difference. Now, if you're talking what difference does it make at 30 wraps, obviously it's going to have more of an impact. So with a 2.5 ounce lead and a small bait, or a small bait and a small PVA stick, there are no rig separation issues between the bait and the lead with this system. If you set it up exactly as I've done it, and all these little details matter, remember, then it works absolutely great. But there is a scenario where things can go wrong, and this is what I'm going to show you next. What's going to make it go wrong is a big PVA stick in combination with a small lead. Now, it's okay if you're only fishing short range. I'm going down the river and it's a 20 yard, 30 yard near marginal chuck, then I'll use sticks this big. Works great, no problem at all. But if I were to try and cast this a decent range, then it is going to separate in flight. And that alone, I haven't actually weighed one of these, but I'm going to guess that that's about 2.5 ounces. If that weighs 2.5 ounces and it's got a massive amount of drag on it, and we've got a 2.5 ounce lead, then we've got a rig separation problem. So there we go. I know that that looks completely imbalanced, and it is completely imbalanced. That's a massive stick with a very small bait. Because that weighs a similar amount to that, then what should happen in flight is that that's going to be behind, lead's going to be travelling first, and it's going to draw through like that, and the lead and the bait are going to separate, and that's a problem. The other thing that's immediately obvious now I've put this big PVA stick on is that I've now got about 5 ounces of weight. This is a 3 pound dwarf rod. It doesn't have the backbone to cast this long ways. How do I know it's going to separate? Because I'm going to watch the lead and the PVA stick in flight, and I'm expecting those to separate in distance as it goes through the air. Yeah, separation, plop. Woefully short. So there was separation, but it wasn't awful. I estimate that when it impacted the water, the rig and the lead was about twice the length of the hook link. So it went from a 6-inch hook link to maybe a 12 or even an 18-inch hook link. Now, I could have corrected that by feathering the lead and bringing the two back together, and also trapping the lead in flight before it even impacted the water. But I didn't do that. I just flopped it in, and we're going to wind down to the lead, see how short it was relative to what I wanted to achieve in the first place, and you can see what a massive difference PVA stick size has when you're using, well, any setup, but especially with running rigs. It's a bad combination. There we go, 14 1/3. So that's a massive difference. So I came here and baited up yesterday, just stick some baits out, and judging from where the baits impacted, then fishing a small PVA stick, 19 and a half wraps, not a problem. I was definitely absolutely in the zone with this setup. But 14 1/3 wraps, that's in another field. That is a long way short. If you're looking for maximum distance but you still want a bit of attraction, my go-to approach is just to take some of the spod syrup and just give the bait a quick dip in that before I cast it. Nice little instant boilie dip. Whee! Right, I've got some other things to show you, but while I'm here, I thought, why don't we actually leave a bait in the water for a bit, stick it on the alarms, and see if we can bag one. Right, let's get something a bit more beefy out the bag. So I've got a 3 pound 9 foot scope, and I've paired that with the LR8000. I have set this up with a mono snag leader, so that's a 0.50 leader, and I'm using that as a shock leader. It's not really for abrasion resistance here because there's no snags to worry about. That's a strong setup for casting maximum range. Now, in terms of lead size, this is a 3 pound rod, and I wouldn't use something like a 4 ounce lead with a 3 pound rod. That's too much. I normally use a 3 ounce lead like that. That's great. Pretty much the maximum that I would be comfortable using on this setup, and this is what we'll use now, is a 3.5 ounce distance lead. Now, because I'm using this with a mono snag leader rather than tubing, I've got that little top bead in place, and What I found is that you just wet that. If you push that too hard in place, you're gonna suffer hook pulls. I was quite shocked by how much difference it makes. So don't be tempted. If you've got this system, if you want to set it up right, just nip it on. You only need to nip it on lightly. You're just using that to stop the PVA stick and the lead separating in flight. You're not using it to hook the fish. If you push it on that hard, you're going to get hook pulls, especially with barbless hooks. Makes a massive difference. So just do that. That's all you need. Or don't even bother. If you use a small enough stick and a small enough bait, it's not an issue. I'm going to use the same 15-pound mono, but because I've got a bigger lead and I've got more power in the rod, I should be able to make a 20mm bait and a decent sized stick go far enough. And because I'm using a bigger bait, I am going to use a bigger hook, but I'm only going to go up to a size 6. There it is, ready to tie and fly. That little top bead is just very lightly nicked in place. That's just a little bit of extra security for me. It's an optional. Casting is all about aerodynamics, and that's going to be pulled from there, and it's all about the amount of surface area that you're presenting to the wind, in which case it's that plus that. Now for most of my fishing that is good enough, but if you really want to cast as far as you can with a PVA stick, this is what you need to do. Don't hook the PVA stick on like that. What you need to do is you get something like a stringer needle. That's a good option if you've got one of those. A long boilie needle would also work. This does not work great if you've put sinkers on the line, but we haven't got any sinkers today. Sinkers add extra drag as well. And just very carefully push that into there. Don't want to interrupt the bead, but that way you're presenting less surface area to the wind when you cast it. In effect, the boilie is being shielded from the wind by the PVA stick. That's the frontal area that you're presenting. So that is going to cast further. Yeah, nice. With this little top bead setup, I can prove that there was no separation in flight. So if I just take that top bead and I get, yeah, there we go. It took a little bit of force to pull that off. If it had just come off like that with no force, then I'd have known that something went wrong. But I had to actually apply a little bit of force to that, so I know that there was no separation. 20, 20, 21. So we've gone from just about 19 with a 2.5 ounce lead, tiny little 15mm bait and a little PVA stick. And we've stepped up to a better class of rod, but still the same power of rod, still a 3-pound rod. 3.5 ounce of lead, we've gone for a 20mm bait and a slightly bigger stick. We've got a difference of 19 to 21 wraps, so we've got an extra 2 wraps. Now, you might say, well, that's not a lot. And if that doesn't make a difference to you in your fishing, then, you know, stick to something like a little dwarf. But if you really need a rod that's going to be able to do anything, anywhere, that's why you need something like a scope, because they really are incredibly universal rods. Right, time for the big guns. So this is a stepped up special, still 9 foot, but that's a 3.5 pound scope. Because of the power of this rod, I can happily clip on a big old 4 ounce distance lead. Same size stick, same size 20mm bait, same length of rig. Okay, so that's interesting. I've pulled that back in and I could already see that the top bead is rattling around there. So again, I just put it on lightly to start with and I just fired it out there. I didn't feather it, I didn't control it at all. And what's happened is that that lead was travelling so fast that when the rig hit the water, there was so much drag on the bait with a PVA stick that that top bead has just been dislodged. So you got two choices: push the top bead on further, or it's all about your casting style. If I'd have stopped that lead in flight, then that top bead would have not been dislodged. 21, oh, just shy of 22 wraps. So by going up to a more powerful 3.5 pound rod and a 4 ounce lead, I've gained another wrap. Now, you might say that's like whoopee-doo, and if that doesn't make a difference for you, then you don't need a 3.5 pound rod. Obviously, in order to get maximum casting distance, then I should be using a 12-foot or a 13-foot rod, but nothing beats the portability of a 9-foot retractable. So this is why I use them all the time in my fishing. The other important factor to note here is that that Fox run ring that I said would break at about 10 pounds of force was good enough for the job, and it is good enough for the job. I can't hit a 9-foot rod hard enough with a 4 ounce lead to break that clip. Now, I know that there are some absolute beasts out there, guys like Terry Headman's, he'll tell you he's literally broken a lead swivel because he's hit the rod so hard, because he's an absolute animal, absolute machine of a caster. But if you need to cast about 22 wraps and you want to use a 9-foot rod, then that little run ring is absolutely fine. If I wanted to reinforce that, what I'd have to do is I'd have to put some PVA tape around there or something. PVA tape basically from that lead onto there, just to take some of the load off this ring. And you could do it like that, that'll work. But for me, in my fishing, it's just not necessary. I don't have to go to those lengths. If you're wondering which rig to use with this lead system, watch this video.